Putin launched an invasion of a neighboring country, Ukraine. Putin is the invader, Putin is the aggressor, Ukraine is the defender. But Trump's approach to this negotiation is to try to put pressure on the defender to capitulate and not punish the invader. And so I would say this is a wholly ineffective and inappropriate way to get peace. And in order to change Putin's behavior, you need to...
Since 2022, Russia has been the most heavily sanctioned country in the world. But have Western sanctions been effective at affecting Russia's behavior? And where specifically have the sanctions hurt Russia the most?
So the sanctions, I think, are probably more advanced than I could have ever imagined before the war started. I can remember when I was lobbying the European Union and other countries for sanctions, everyone was like pushing me away and tiptoeing around and so on. And so the sanctions that came into place, freezing the Russian central bank reserves, cutting most Russian banks off of SWIFT, various other types of things have been quite effective and quite painful for the Russians. But there is one absolutely gigantic loophole in the sanctions program, and that has been oil. Russia sells crude oil. It's a major part of the Russian government budget. It's a major export of Russia. It's a major source of foreign exchange reserves. And Russia continues to be able to sell their crude oil, and they continue to make hundreds of billions of dollars from that money, and that money effectively funds the war in Ukraine. And in order to change Putin's behavior, you need to make him run out of money. And the way to make him run out of money is to restrict his ability to sell his oil. And the way you do that is, instead of going after the shadow fleet and all these little measures that have been taken and ineffective, I should say, you go after the buyers of the Russian oil. And there are 8 oil refineries that buy a majority of Russian oil. 2 of them are located in China, 4 of them are in India, 2 of them in Turkey. And if you say to those oil refineries that you'll be under sanctions if you continue to buy Russian oil, give them 8 weeks or 12 weeks to find another source of oil, I think that would put Putin out of business.
Are you worried that sanctions targeting India or China will in turn push these countries closer to Russia? I mean, we have seen signs of that already in 2022 with India.
Well, I mean, these countries, how are they close to Russia? They're mainly close to Russia because they're buying Russian oil. There's no other real closeness in material terms, and so I mean, if these countries are the ones effectively funding Putin's war, then we have to stop them funding Putin's war, and the way to do that is to target these oil refineries. And it's not targeting India; it's targeting 4 Indian oil refineries.
Going into 2026, Russian economy is facing some headwinds. They have budget deficit, the price of oil is going down, and there are even talks about possible recession. But do you think that these challenges are enough to actually hamper Russia's war machine in Ukraine?
I think if we just were to watch the pressure that they're under right now, going into 2026, I don't think that's enough to stop them in the war in Ukraine. I think that Russia, or I should say Putin, will behave like the North Koreans have. He will always have enough money for his war, even if he has to starve his population. And so you just need to make sure that he just doesn't have enough money for anything. And that will come down to stopping the flow of oil that funds his war.
You have been championing confiscation or seizure of Russian assets that are held in the West and using them to fund Ukraine. And Ukraine has been saying the same thing. But is there really the political will in Europe to do that? Like the EU has not been even able to agree on the reparations loan, which was supposed to be covered by Russian assets. So do you see some realistic pathway toward using the Russian assets effectively to help Ukraine?
Well, I think we got to the point where almost everybody agreed that Russia's frozen assets should be used for the defense of Ukraine. And it was only the country in which the frozen assets were located in, Belgium, at Euroclear, that the Belgian authorities fought back. Why did they fight back, and why did they stop the whole thing? Because the Prime Minister of Belgium was personally threatened by the Russian security services. That's why. And so I think we're almost there. Unfortunately, he blocked it. As a result of that, a loan was made from the European Union to fill in the gap of 90 billion euros. I believe that a year from now, we're going to be having the same conversation, except that we'll have burned through half of that loan. And I think that the conversation about the frozen assets will then become another political conversation. And I think that eventually Putin should pay for this, not the European taxpayers. And I think that will eventually rise to the surface.
Do you think that lobbying from European banks, from European businesses, is also one of the aspects that is holding up some radical decisions on the Russian assets?
Well, there's always people lobbying. The Russians are lobbying. The Russians are doing whatever they can. They're paying politicians. They're flooding social media. They're threatening people, and they're going to do everything they can, because there's two things that they don't want to have happen. One is they don't want Ukraine to have that money so that Ukraine can defend itself, and two, they need the money from China, India, and Turkey from the sale of oil to fund their war machine. If you allow the Ukrainians to have the money to defend themselves, and you allow or you restrict the Chinese, Indians, and Turks from buying Russian oil, I think that we could be in a situation where the war, I don't think there's going to be a ceasefire, but I think if you really constrict Putin's financial ability, he just won't be able to pay soldiers to enlist. He won't be able to pay for ammunition from the North Koreans. And as he gets into that frame of mind, then you end up in a situation where he just launches less attacks and has less soldiers trying to cross the border, and it could quiet down. That's, I think, the best we can hope for at the moment.
Let's say that the war quiets down, or we have some kind of a ceasefire. Do you think that afterward European businesses are eager to back into business with Russia, or do you think that this decoupling is more permanent?
Well, I think that at the moment there's no chance that anyone's going to come back to Russia anytime soon, and nor should they. I mean, I think that Russia needs to, first of all, withdraw from Ukraine, pay the damages, war reparations to Ukraine and Ukrainians. Only then can you have a reasonable conversation about, what happens in, post-war Russia. Do people come back? What are the rules going to look like? But I think we're so far away from that, it's not even worth discussing.
How would you assess President Trump's policy regarding sanctions? We have seen his sanctions on Rosneft, on Lukoil last year. He imposed additional 25 tariffs on India, which recently, as he announced, was lifting again. So would you say they're effective? Are they falling short?
They're definitely falling short. They're definitely, but having said that, going after Lukoil and Rosneft, that's strong. If it's true that India has stopped buying Russian oil, that's strong. But there's more that needs to be done. We need to go after China. We need to go after Turkey. I don't believe that India has stopped buying Russian oil. So, it's not nothing. It clearly irritates the Russians. I heard Sergei Lavrov complaining about that, which is good. But it could go a lot further. And Trump is a guy who likes to think of himself as the king of the jungle. But he's been kind of weak on this front. Putin has humiliated him, and he's not done anything about it.
What do you think about the Trump administration's approach when they tie sanctions to progress in the peace talks? I think Secretary Bessent said this, that the next step in sanctions will depend on how the peace negotiations progress. And also he said that after the war, the sanctions on Russian oil could be lifted. Do you think that this is the right approach, or is the US giving up on its leverage?
You can't possibly withdraw sanctions while the war is still going on. The war needs to be ending. Russia needs to withdraw from Ukraine. Russia needs to pay damages. then you can talk about withdrawing sanctions, but not until those three conditions have been met. And so I think it's absurd to say if Russia were to make steps in the right direction, we might withdraw sanctions. That would be a terrible mistake. Total appeasement, complete capitulation, weakness of a massive scale.
There is this offer on the table from the Russian side on some kind of, they call it the Dmitriev package, economic cooperation worth $12 trillion, which is several times more than the Russian yearly GDP. Do you see this as some kind of realistic proposal? Like, what are the actual prospects of some Russia-US economic cooperation?
Well, Russia and the U.S. never had any economic cooperation. Why? Because Russia didn't have anything to sell to the United States. What does Russia sell? Crude oil. Who's the biggest crude oil producer in the world? The United States. They don't need to buy any Russian crude oil. What does Russia also sell? Natural gas. What's one of the major exports from the United States? Natural gas. So there's no natural commercial alliance between the two countries. There's very little commercial links. And besides that, it's not that big a country. It's 141 million people. It's not like there's some huge consumer market that's all of a sudden going to be open to American consumer companies. I think it's just nonsense. I was the largest investor in Russia for 10 years. It's a country which doesn't have that much to offer. I mean, what they have to offer are cheap natural resources, and that's it. And the natural resources that they're offering America are already being produced by America.
So what is behind this offer? What is Russia trying to gain here?
Vladimir Putin is a master intelligence officer. He looks for desires of his targets, and he also looks for weaknesses of his targets. Trump has said he wants to negotiate, he wants to do deals. That's Trump's big thing. I like to do deals. And he likes to throw out really big numbers. So the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia comes in and says, we're going to invest $1 trillion in America. And so they've read all this stuff. They say, okay, we're going to come and offer some really big sounding deal. And because Trump can then announce that and say what a great businessman he is. And so that's what this is all about, is just playing to Trump's language, his vanity and all that kind of stuff.
In your opinion, how effective has Trump's diplomacy been in regards to his push to broker peace in Ukraine?
Well, we have to understand the situation. Putin launched an invasion of a neighboring country, Ukraine. Putin is the invader, Putin is the aggressor, Ukraine is the defender. So what's happened in these negotiations is that Putin continues to invade, he continues to aggress, he continues to kill. Ukraine continues to defend themselves, but Trump's approach to this negotiation is to try to put pressure on the defender to capitulate and not punish the invader. And so I would say this is a wholly ineffective and inappropriate way to get peace, because if the invader doesn't feel pressure to stop invading, why should he stop invading? And that's pretty much what's happened. Putin says, I'm feeling good. I think, I've got the American president on my side. There's been no consequences to me beyond what's already happened. I'm going to carry on. And what Putin is hoping for is that he can just keep Trump involved in this peace negotiation. I say peace because it's not really a peace negotiation. And in such a way that anytime there's talks of increased sanctions, like these oil sanctions that I've been discussing, Trump will say, no, we don't want to upset these delicate negotiations by imposing sanctions. We look at all the progress we've made in having these negotiations. And so Putin can buy for time. And during this time, what Putin is hoping for is that some government changes in Europe. Some far-right government comes in Germany, maybe with the AfD, or France, the National Front. And all of a sudden, Europe's alliance to support Ukraine fractures in the same way as the American support for Ukraine was suspended. That's Putin's hope. That's his prayer, is that buy for time, watch these democracies all fight among themselves, and since he doesn't care about the loss of his own soldiers, he can just throw more and more of them into the meat grinder while he's playing for time.
So how do we avoid this scenario? Is this perhaps an opportunity for Europe to reassert itself, to become more of an autonomous actor, independent actor in the negotiations?
Well, Europe is not involved in the negotiations. I mean, Europe doesn't want to talk to Vladimir Putin for the very simple reason that he's an invader and he's not stopped invading. The way that Europe can solve this problem is very simple. Impose sanctions on the 8 refineries that buy majority of the Russian oil, and then Putin will run out of money in 6 months' time, and then he won't be able to do this anymore. And at that point, there might be some either sort of de facto ceasefire because he just doesn't have the resources to carry on, or maybe Putin even offers to do a proper ceasefire on his own.
We at the Kyiv Independent can deliver you news from the ground thanks to the support of our audiences. If you want to see us continue our work, please consider joining Kyiv Independent community at kyivindependent.com/membership. Thank you.